Well, thank you very much for coming. I'm really, really, really honored to be here with a kind of a privileged situation to talk about drawing and exhibiting drawing, because our three guests today have an incredible experience with drawing, and we have three different situations here with someone who founded a drawing gallery, a gallery dedicated to drawing, someone who's actually working very hard towards creating a place to exhibit drawing, and someone who's moving on to a new experience and who's had a decade programming drawing. So we're going to talk about all that, ask some questions around what it is to have a program around a medium, a specific medium, the medium of drawing. Also, I've noticed that there's these three institutions mention interdisciplinarity, and what does that mean with drawing? Is drawing particularly good for that? And also what it is to program events around drawing. The drawing room has a big tradition of doing that, and very specific and very demanding almost themes that really open up from drawing to other territories. So without further ado, I will briefly introduce each of our guests. So Kate McFarlane, well, first of all, thank you so much for being here today. You know, we're kind of braving all the strikes and all the jet lag and everything. We're really happy to have you here. So Kate is a curator and writer based in London. She began her career in the public visual arts sector at Riverside Studios in '84, where she curated exhibitions of, help me out, Bethan Hughes, Tim Rowlands and the Kids of Survival, and Ilya Kabakov, amongst others. And then in 2000, she went on to co-found the Drawing Room. So alongside her extensive curatorial work, she has edited 14 Drawing Room titles, and most recently, Graphology, Drawing from Automatism and Automation. She has curated shows such as Graphic Witness, a Drawing Room, Line at Listen Gallery. And here in France, actually, she's worked with Dovalouche, and she's curated the show Mea Culpa of a Septic at the Fondation d'Entreprise Ricard in 2016. Michelle White is a senior curator at the Menil Collection in Houston, in Texas. And among her exhibitions, there's Barnett Newman, The Late Work, Leaps into the Void, Documents of Nouveau Realist Performance, Between Land and Sea, Artists of the Coantes, Slip, and V. Salmon's Death and Disaster, 1964-1966. She was the co-curator of the first retrospective of the drawings of Richard Serra that opened at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and traveled to the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And she organized the retrospective drawing exhibition of works on paper by Lee Bontekoe for the Menil and the Princeton University Art Museum in 2014. She has worked with Klaus Oldenburg on a publication and exhibition of The Strange Eggs, his early poems and collages from the late 1950s, and she organized Site Twombly, Treatise on the Veil at the Morgan Library and Museum. And, well, prospectively, she's currently working on a drawing survey with Roni Horn and an exhibition on the early work of Walter de Maria. And finally, Brett Littman is the very fresh new director of the Isamu Noguchi Museum Garden and Garden in Long Island City in New York, and he's lucky enough to take a ferry to work every day from now on. He was the executive director of the Drawing Center from 2007 to 2018, so more than 10 years working with drawing. He was, before that, the deputy director of MoMA PS1 from 2003 to 2007. And even before that, he was a co-director of Dieudonné Paper Mill from 2001 to 2003. He's also an art critic and lecturer. an active essayist for museum and gallery catalogs, and has written articles for a wide range of United States-based and international art, fashion, and design magazines. And recently, he curated the exhibition, The Projective Drawing. We'll see some images of it in the PowerPoint that will be rolling, at the Australian Cultural Forum, Austria Cultural Forum, sorry. I know there's Austrians there, I'm sorry. And Judith Bernstein's House of Horrors, which was the last show he curated at the Drawing Centre. Let's start. I'll just try to start this PowerPoint. All goes well. Is it going? No. Yes, it is. Okay. All right. Well, let's start after these introductions. Maybe I'll start with Kate, because we have the pleasure of having someone here who co-founded an art gallery dedicated to drawing. So perhaps, I'm sure lots of people have asked you this question. We'll probably move on to more specific ones. But can you please just share with us the experience, where that came from, the idea came from, and perhaps what the steps were to create the drawing room in London?
Thank you for asking me. Thank you for coming along. Well, it was a conversation that I had with two other curators, Mary Doyle and Catherine Stout, all working in the public sector in London, some of us already for a couple of decades. And it was really from studio visits and looking also at exhibitions and feeling that in the studio, drawing was used very much as a primary medium in very ambitious forms, and that at that time, which was when we first started the discussions in 1999, there were not that many exhibitions still devoted to drawing, and indeed there was nowhere in the UK, certainly, that was devoted to the exploration of drawing in the way that the Drawing Centre in New York was, and Drawing Centre in New York was definitely a model for us in setting up the program. Is it not on? Closer. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, basically, the idea was to really be driven by art practice. So we actually are part of a studio organisation. So we started out as it was just an idea, a curatorial project, and we didn't necessarily think we would have a space, that we would simply curate exhibitions for different venues around the country and around the world. And then we had an opportunity to actually use a studio in an artist studio complex as a gallery. And we formed this kind of partnership with Tannery Arts, which has some very established artists. Rachel Whiteread was one of the artists at one stage, and Alison Wilding. And so we kind of have a kind of base, if you like, with artist practice, and that's really very much leads how we look at drawing. So in the first 10 years of our program, we were very much kind of pushing and experimenting with what drawing might be and pushing the boundaries of drawing, really not ourselves starting with the definition of drawing, but using what artists were doing in the studio and then what they did for us in the gallery to kind of figure out what might be a new definition of drawing.
Can I interrupt, because you were talking about the definition of drawing, and you're saying specifically that you didn't want to start with that, and you were just looking at the work that you saw from artists in the studio. Did you ever come to a point where it was important to ask yourselves what drawing was, or what a good drawing was? Because in a conversation with Brett recently in New York, Brett, in a very kind of in a statement like that, just said, I'm not interested in good drawings. So, I'm interested in knowing if it was more an intuitive process, or if at some point it was capital or crucial for you to kind of reassess what you were doing and to provide a definition.
We try not to divide. I think definitions are a bad idea. We don't want to limit what we might do in the future. We like to keep things as open and as experimental as possible and not rule anything out. So, yeah, definitely not.
As you can see from the images that are rolling.
Yeah, I mean, but having said that, we're always challenged, and I think it's always when drawing comes up against other media in particular that you're more able to actually come up with a definition of what drawing might be.
So maybe I would move on to Michelle in a kind of in a complete opposite extreme of projects and of starting points and of definitions of what drawing can be and what institutionally how you can look at drawing, because you're in a position now of starting out with a space for drawing, but in a completely other period in time. So what motivated the Drawing Institute? Because perhaps you could talk a little bit about the collection, about manual collection, and then perhaps the idea of coming up with, like, really briefly about the collection, and then how it started out and how the Institute came to be created.
Sure. So it's a long story, so I'm going to make it as fast as possible, so we can get to drawing and the new Drawing Institute building. The Menil Foundation was founded by John and Dominique de Menil. They were French. They moved to Houston in the early 1940s to run Schlumberger World Headquarters that had just relocated from France to Texas at the height of the sort of oil boom. And they really were interested in turning what many people saw as a cultural wasteland that was Texas in the 1940s into a really vibrant cultural scene. And they did that through patronage, by collecting work, and eventually opening the Menil Collection in 1987. So we've just celebrated our 30th anniversary. We have about 17,000 objects, and the collection's really been formed by what was initially their collection and their unique interest, from American post-war art to surrealism, and primarily West African and Byzantine. So we're not an encyclopedic collection, but we are continuing to build. So part of, even before Mrs. de Menil died in 1997, there was this idea that what could be the next building for the Menil to embark on, and drawing was always incredibly important to her. And to an important group of trustees who were building their own drawing collections. So the idea was sort of formed in the 90s, but it really took root around 2006 when the board decided to initiate the project. And the first hire, after we hired a master site planner to rethink the campus, before we hired the architect, we hired Bernice Rose to be the first chief curator of the Menil Drawing Institute. This is before the building started. And of course, Bernice Rose is the curator of the well-known exhibition for which this fair is based, the title, Drawing Now, at the Museum of Modern Art in 1976. So she was really groundbreaking in establishing a discourse around drawing, particularly modern and contemporary drawing as we know it now. So she had an incredible kickoff to what this could be, started doing projects. We started organizing exhibitions under the idea of the Drawing Institute and building the collection. So we are about to announce the opening date. I'll say publicly, we hope it will open by the end of this year, so very soon. We're close to completion, and we've been watching Kate's work and Brett's work, because we need to figure out what this will be and how we will move forward with these questions about drawing that we've just started to really put into practice.
And so in terms of the structure of the building, and we're talking about definitions of drawing, what drawing is and how drawing works in space, is that something that is considered at all in the construction, the architecture of the building? Are you having a conversation with the architects about that?
Yeah, and certainly, I think we also don't want to be confined by a definition and love the sort of fluidity of lack of definition. On the other hand, what makes this institute unique is that it's not only an exhibition space, but it's also a custom designed building to hold our collection for conservation care, for the study. So on one hand, we can kind of go both ways, where we have to, for logistics reasons, actually define what drawing is in terms of what can be stored in the building. So on the other hand, in terms of thinking long-term about exhibitions, we certainly want to keep it as experimental and as expansive as possible.
Do you have an idea of the periodicity of the program at all, of how you're going to determine the exhibitions, if they're going to work very actively with the collection, if they're going to be outside artists that will bring, kind of an addition to the collection?
We want it to be both. And we really, I think when here's the slide. When we open, a major component of this building is a drawing room. This is a place where we want to make the collection accessible to scholars, to students, to artists, and want to utilize the collection as a way of generating new scholarship, new knowledge, and I'd like to think new curatorial ideas about future drawing exhibitions. Well, we can also use the exhibition program to bring in new artists that will eventually become a part of our collection.
Right, well, Brett, this is the moment to kind of draw up a balance of 10 years of work, and you've moved, you've experienced kind of a lot of changes in the idea of showing drawing, and you've tested them, and perhaps you've even kind of innovated in a way. The program has changed quite a bit. So would you like to talk a little bit about how things have changed since you started at the Drawing Center, and how you can evaluate now what it has been to work there, and how things have evolved for you in a way, and how you redefine the program along the years? It's kind of a long question, so we'll probably cut it into pieces a little bit.
Well, I think that when I came to the Drawing Center in 2007, we had a staff meeting pretty early on, probably about 6 months in, where we read our mission statement, and I said to the staff, I think we've accomplished all of these things. Maybe we should just close our doors. I was being a little bit facetious about that, but just in the sense of kind of trying to understand that the Drawing Center to me was a little bit in a defensive position about trying to plant the flag that drawing was important. It was something that was primary, it was commercially viable, it was art historically viable. And my sense was, our story is also tangentially tied to Bernice Rose, because the founder of the Drawing Center, Martha Beck, resigned from MoMA. She worked under Bernice, and she was upset because every time she pitched a show to Dick Oldenburg, and maybe Bernice herself, she was told, great, we'll put it in a closet on the second floor, and this was in 1976. So when she left MoMA, she wanted to start an institution that was about drawing, and that she also was going to studio visits and meeting artists in Soho, and many artists were just drawing. They couldn't do anything else. So she was quite prescient in understanding that drawing was something that was primary to artists. My feeling is that we actually had to change our approach, and my take was that we could be a think tank. I mean, we were always a think tank. At that point, we were 30 years old. I think we've pushed the boundary of where drawing begins and ends probably more than any other institution in the world, because we don't have a collection. We're a Kunsthalle. We develop our shows. We're thinking always about how the medium is operating, both historically and contemporary. We showed 14th century drawings and work that was made yesterday. And I guess that for me, the first real issue was, what is the question that we ask? And that question for me turned out to be, is this thing a drawing? It's a very simple question, and to that there were three answers.
It's on the website, actually, in your mission statement.
And then we did change the mission statement after a long period of time, but I think that, for me there were three answers to that question: yes, no, and maybe. And even if the answer was no and maybe, I still might want to put it on our wall. So when we made that shift in terms of understanding how we would focus our program, the other thing is that I'm not trained as an art historian, so I come into the field really from both the administrative side of the nonprofit world, but also being a philosopher and a poet in school. So my sense was that drawing was universal. There were many friends who were architects, landscape architects, industrial designers, scientists, musicians, who were using drawing to express visual ideas. And my thinking was that the Drawing Center had always had at its core the visual art, but the first show that we did was the drawings of Gaudí. So, there was a long history at the institution of working in other mediums and other disciplines. And I think that for me to open the institution up to trying to understand how drawing was operating in these other fields was incredibly important. And I must say that over the last 11 years, probably the most complex and wide-ranging conversations that I've had about how drawing operates in contemporary culture may not be with artists. They may be with people in other fields who are using drawing to really think through very complex social, economic, political, theoretical information ideas. And so that kind of informed how I wanted to set the program forward in 2007. I think today, we've gone through some shifts, and that idea I don't think it's run its full course, but surely since, I will no longer be the director, that will be up to the next director if they want to take that on. But the more recent shift, I think, for Claire Gilman and I, who's my senior curator, chief curator at the Drawing Center, is that we're very interested in how drawing is actually operating as because the fact that it can be immediate, because the fact that actually it can affect the world right now, maybe actually thinking about drawing in a kind of political way. How can we use drawing, or how can we use drawing schools, or how can we use kind of pedagogical systems that incorporate drawing to affect social change, or to at least impact social change? So that could
do
be
you
a
think
next.
that pertains to drawing itself, or is it something that is more widely institutional as a phenomenon?
We're going on a lot of studio visits, and there are a lot of artists who are working in these kinds of projects in which they want to include drawing as part of bigger kind of thinking, about what artists are in the world. But drawing, because again, it's immediate, because it's portable, because it's something that's simple, because it's economically easy to move it from place to place, becomes a great medium for artists to explore these very issues. So I don't know whether or not it's about the institutional shift in terms of institutions wanting to be more socially relevant. I would say that our feeling is that it comes out of discussions with artists who are thinking in this way. So we just finished a program called Winter Term with an artist named DeCourse Dyson, and she did a whole project about environmental racism, but it starts from drawing. And so we actually prototyped for her a drawing school, which she wants to put in upstate New York and teach people how to deal with environmental racism through the concept of drawing.
So that's a project that you have that goes outside of the institution itself, right?
It will start inside the institution and will grow outside, and we also are going to take other organizations. Next year we'll work with the Center for Urban Pedagogy, which pairs community groups that have some kind of issue with socially conscious graphic designers, and then they make books or pamphlets. So drawing is absolutely essential. Could be like Korean nail salon workers who have a health issue, and then they make a comic book or a kind of illustrated pamphlet, which can be downloaded. But what CUP doesn't know how to do is work with artists. So we want to be the membrane in which we can then introduce artists, and they can learn their toolbox.
Kate, do you agree with this idea that drawing is particularly prone to pedagogic measures and to communicating political or sociological ideas, or help communities? And does the drawing room have any activities or any projects in that sense?
Well, we did an exhibition titled Graphic Witness about a year ago, which really took the subject of using drawing to be witness to the current kind of political turmoil. But it was a trans-historical exhibition, as a lot of our exhibitions are now, so went back to the work of artists like Georges Gros, and it included Leon Golob and Nancy Sparrow, as well as very young artists like Munira Al-Sol, a Syrian artist who was in Documenta this year, or last year. And those artists were very, very politically engaged and saw their work as really making a political statement. The work was radically political. And indeed, we do, and then there are artists, we've worked with some of the images of the exhibition we did with Alexandra Mir, who is also a very politically motivated artist in the way that most of her projects are collective. So she works, she makes the project, the mural that will come up here, which shows the changing London skyline, was sort of choreographed by Alexandra Mir. It was a sort of performance that happened in the gallery with a team of assistants, all of whom were paid, decent kind of salaries to take part in the work. So, the idea was that it was a sort of a pedagogical project. She was initially giving them a lot of kind of guidance, but their input was really important to the outcome of the exhibition, of the mural. And we do as well, with Drawing Centre in New York, we also have projects reaching out to the community involving artists, and we find that a lot of artists in particular at the moment are very politically engaged and are very interested in working in collaboration with particular communities and realising projects in various forms, as like graphic novels and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, because you have residencies, right? Or you invite artists to contribute in a different way. Because I think we'll probably talk about that with Brett as well. This idea that they contribute differently, because you also have a sort of a study room, and you the last artist that you invited to do a project in that room was actually a comics artist, Sanart Banerjee. So that how is that incorporated in the program, and does that reach out from that study room to other areas of the city?
It depends. I mean, each one is different. So they're like what we call sort of supported residencies that happen in our study library. So our study library is a collection of titles devoted to drawing post 1970 monographs. And theory and collection catalogues, etc. And a very important part of the collection is reading lists. So for each exhibition, we invite the exhibiting artists and the curators to put together a reading list of books that have particularly inspired their work, and that's not necessarily kind of fine art books, that reaches out across all areas, and that begins to build a picture of where artists today are getting their ideas and inspiration from. And then part of that is inviting artists to spend a 6-month period with the study collection and to make work for the study wall in response to that collection, but also to being in London. So Sanat Banerjee spent time in the study, but he also was walking around the streets of London listening to Indian music. And making drawings in response. So each one is slightly different, but we also do, every 2 years, we do a bursary award where we have an artist we give over the gallery to an artist to use it as a studio for a period of a month, and they can, it's for an artist who's based outside of London, so it's an opportunity to have a platform in London.
So, Brett, you mentioned, you had an expression that I found that kind of, in a way, compelled me. You talked about having a defensive position regarding drawing, and here in Drawing Now we experience that every year, where from the moment of the committee where we evaluate the projects that we receive, and very often we ask ourselves, okay, but is this still drawing? We have a sense of going towards something and then kind of moving on and moving onward and being in another territory, which is great, and it happens a lot with drawing. So my question perhaps would be, do you feel that there is a defensive position in terms of the curators that work with you, or the artists that you work with, or even, I guess, that would also take us to the audiences and what the expectations are regarding drawing? And are you asked that question in terms of drawing? Because there's always this very specific idea of what drawing is. And what a good drawing is, and what a good draftsman is. So are you confronted with that at all?
Yeah, well, actually, I wanted to say two things. I mean, one, to go back to the comment I made to you when we saw each other in New York about I wasn't interested in good drawing. Actually, what I was responding to specifically was that, I think over the last 11 years, there have been some critics who have said that the Drawing Center no longer is interested in what a great drawing is. And my response is, I'm not interested in what great drawing is, because the Frick, the Morgan, the Met, the Manil, there are going to be many other places that have collections that are interested in the idea of great draftsmanship and the idea of collecting drawings and the idea of telling some kind of story or a teleological story about the history of drawings. My institution is an institution that is much freer in the way that it can approach the medium. And I think that for me, our position in the ecosystem in the art world is not to be a place that shows great drawing in the same way that other major institutions will. So I just wanted to make that clear. I'm not against drawing, and I'm not against beautiful things. I'm not against well-rendered things. Just that the institutional position doesn't have to be that particular position. That said, in terms of one other funny thing that happened was, I had worked at MoMA PS1 before I came to the Drawing Center, and I had lunch with Glenn Lowry, the director of MoMA, after I left and became the director. And at that point at MoMA, on the top floor was Mira Schindel and Leon Ferrari. There was the Judith Rothschild collection. There was another show on the second floor of drawing. And I said, thanks, Glenn. And he said, why? And I said, Martha Beck would be over the moon. The whole damn building is drawing. I mean, it's the 6th floor down to the 2nd floor. I mean, it's the first time in the history of the Museum of Modern Art that you've turned over the whole building to this medium. And to me, that was also a kind of transitional moment where I thought, we're not fighting against this, we're not fighting this battle anymore. It's won. I mean, in some sense, we don't have to fight the battle against the institutional block or conservatism about the medium, because it's all over the place. Are drawing curators conservative? Are drawing departments conservative? I mean, listen, we work within a system that I would say continues to move forward a dialogue around the issues that we want to deal with, and they're pretty multivalent, and they're working on lots of different levels. I would say my fear would be, my legacy at the Drawing Center could be, well, Brett didn't show a lot of drawing in the 11 years that he was there, or that he wasn't that interested in drawing. I mean, I am interested in drawing, but I'm interested in at it from the position of process, from the position of how artists think, and actually, from the position of, I do shows where I think this would be interesting for artists to look at. I mean, this is something that I think visually, in terms of visual information, in terms of the way that someone explores the medium, that they can learn from. So I'm not interested in positioning it within art historical terms. I might be interested in positioning it from the artist eye, and also giving artists the ability, and not only artists, but graphic designers, information technology people, scientists, musicians, blah, blah, blah. I mean, all of these things, and kind of creating a much more open field for the medium of drawing to operate in.
Michelle, is this a concern at all, since you're starting out? Are you aware of the expectations of an audience, and specifically the audience you have in Houston? Because starting now from this history that we've been alluding to, and how things are changing now, and how, in a way, drawing is pretty much, in terms of a market, but also in institutional terms, represented now in the bigger institutions. Are you working on from there, and what decisions are you taking in regards to that?
Wow, okay, that's a
very long question.
It's a great question, and I just want to sort of maybe jump off from what Brett was saying, and something that we've thought a lot about, and thanks to the Drawing Room and the Drawing Center, they've laid the groundwork essentially for sort of developing a field of knowledge around drawing that takes it away from these questions around this issue of good drawing versus bad drawing. And in fact, where we need to push it is thinking about drawing, especially politically, in terms of a critical strategy, language that we have no problem using when we're talking about painting, but somehow this sort of idea of the history of drawing and suddenly stops. And what I'm really excited about with this Drawing Institute and thinking about it as an institute is establishing more of an art history around drawing. And I think that's something we can offer into this field that we're participating in, bringing in scholars, like what's happening in drawing in the 1970s. It's different. It's that artists are seeing drawing as a critical strategy, as a different way of making that's sort of not coded in the past, not coded with the sort of weight of painting. And these are just entirely new terrains and fields of art history that I really hope that we can promote, because I think the result of that is, one, a more sophisticated audience, and two, allowing artists to also sort of participate in the formation of a drawing art history, if that makes sense. So I guess by way of your question about audience, I don't think audiences have any problem enjoying a great Jasper Johns drawing show. And of course, we will have one of the most significant collections of Jasper Johns drawings and Cy Twombly drawings in the country. But it's how we use those artists and the sort of well-loved and easy drawings that our audiences will have no problem with, to sort of push it further. And I'm excited to watch and see what happens with that.
Can I just say one thing? I mean, I think it's interesting in the United States, currently there are no drawing fairs in our country. There's an art on paper fair, but there's no specific drawing fair in the US. And, one of the things that I find, I come to Europe a lot, and I've been to this fair a lot, and to fairs in Madrid and other places where they have drawing fairs. There's a connoisseurship and an appreciation of works on paper, which is not to say that there isn't in the US, but I would say that American collectors are more interested in painting and sculpture and things that are, to be frank, it might be a little bit more of an asset, class. I mean, there's a more transactional scenario. But in Europe, I mean, there still remains a kind of tradition of, I think, connoisseurship around work on paper. And my hope would be at a place like Manil. I mean, at the Drawing Center, of course, we show a lot of things that are not for sale. We show things that are from archives and other things. So we're kind of at an arm's length distance of the art market. Although I've done a Richter show and a Sean Scully show and other things like that. But I think a place like the Manil can build that level of connoisseurship, and because of the fact that you can go and visit, and hopefully it would be easy to make an appointment and take a Jasper Johns drawing out of a drawer and see that firsthand. That's the kind of thing that I would hope would extend from the program and the mission that you have.
Yeah, but also I think you have a really valid point in the sense, if I understood correctly, which is something that I think you do as well in your talks, in the events around your shows, which is perhaps taking drawing in a wider approach, so taking on what you've been talking about, which is a wider idea of drawing, and revisiting history as well, and understanding works as drawings, which is something that we wouldn't have done before. And in my research, I'm doing that with conceptualism, for example, and looking at graphic works. And of course, I will use perhaps another expression, but I am looking at works on paper. And so, in a way, having a kind of program that doesn't depend on a collection kind of can also inform perhaps a more, I don't know, perhaps a more, I don't want to say traditional approach to the idea of drawing, but at least to reinform what we consider in our collection to be drawing, and to be considered as drawing, and to be shown alongside drawing, to bring audiences a new perspective. I don't know if that's something you consider to be doing, particularly in your talks.
I think we hopefully address it throughout the programme as well, in the way that we
do.
With the exhibitions that we do. I mean, the exhibition that we've just closed, which is called Everything We Do is Music, which is a John Cage maxim, which looks at the influence of Indian classical music on artists in the West, and a lot of Indian artists as well, but across the world. And it was curated by Shanae Javeri, who's a curator at the Met in the Asian department. He bought, I mean, we do like to work with a lot of guest curators at Drawing Room, particularly curators who have travelled in parts of the world that we haven't travelled, who will give us that access to new artists. We're always trying to widen the net of in terms of our programme. And that introduced us to a lot of artists from Pakistan and from India and from Argentina.
Tantric drawings. You had a beautiful exhibition of tantric drawings.
Yeah, and we've done two sort of Indian-themed exhibitions in the last couple of years. Yeah, again with a guest curator and somebody with knowledge of Indian artists working with neo-tantric work in the 1980s in India. We tried to But we more and more we do include historical works from collections, but also we do have an interesting. We're like Brett. We're not profit. Well, I'm like Menel as well. We're a non-profit institution, but we do have this interesting little connection with the art market every 2 years when we do our drawing biennials, which are actually one of the ways that we survive as an organisation. Is we do a biennial where we invite artists to make a drawing for us on an A4 sheet of paper, and they make the work. It's a new work made in response. We actually post the piece of paper to them. They unwrap it from tissue, and if we're lucky, they make a drawing for us. It's a brand new drawing, and we make an exhibition of these drawings. This is every 2 years, and last year in 2017 we had 240 drawings by artists from across the world. And what it becomes is like a survey of how artists are using drawing today. It's also a way for us to keep up relationships with artists, because we don't represent artists. So if we've done an exhibition with an artist, you don't necessarily have a reason to keep up that connection. But with this, every 2 years, we write to the artists and ask them if they'll contribute to drawing. So it's a way of us keeping in contact, and we always researching drawing, and we try to set ourselves up as a centre of excellence and resource and knowledge for contemporary drawing. So curators and different institutions can come to us for information about artists who are specialising in drawing. But yes, and through that exhibition, we also encourage collecting of drawing specifically, and drawing, that is affordable as well. So we have artists who have just left college whose work is. So you can acquire a unique work of art for £250, or you can buy a William Kentridge or an Anthony Gormley or a Tracy Emin for many thousands of pounds, we hope. So we have that interesting intersection with it, and we do feel that we are trying to encourage through that. It wasn't kind of necessarily intentional at first. It was about raising funds so we could set up Drawing Room and to keep it going. But actually, we do feel that we actually make quite a contribution to encouraging the collecting of drawing.
So have you noticed the difference in approach, or the difference in the market, in the commercial sense of drawing, and how things have changed and have evolved, and you probably contributed? Do you have a sense of how your programs have helped the drawings to be sold specifically and for higher prices than they were before, actually? Do you have a sense of that?
Oh gosh, definitely. I mean, the prices of drawing, it's just astronomically, it's unbelievable. And now, Hauser and Wirth, Gagosian, and a lot of their shows are centred on drawing, and it is a very, very, profitable way of running a gallery, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I had a specific experience because the Drawing Centre had won £1 million British from the Art Fund, and we worked with Middlesbrough, an institution in the UK, and we were able to buy 96 drawings between 2007 and 2012. What I will say is the power of £1 million British in relationship to what you can buy in drawing as opposed to painting was pretty astounding. And we built a very incredible alternative collection in the UK that really was based on some precepts that the curator and I had thought about that would tell a different kind of story about the contemporary drawing world. The earliest work that we got was a 1948 Ellsworth Kelly collage, and the most current work was a commission by Lawrence Weiner for the outside of the building, and drawings that came along with that commission. So in some ways what was fascinating was just thinking about it. If you had an extra $1 million sitting around and you wanted to do something with that, and you could go out into the marketplace and buy art, buying drawings would be a pretty damn good way of spending your money, because you could actually buy some of the best examples, buy the best artists, and have an amazing collection almost immediately.
Yes, drawing prices are going up, but also all the other media,
right,
and painting in particular is still incredibly more expensive than drawing anyway. With exceptions.
But in order to find those things, it wasn't like just going to galleries. I mean, I was always the guy in the back room at Basel looking at something under the dealer's couch that was like sitting there, but they hadn't even put up on the wall, or going to an artist studio and digging something out from like under a radiator. I mean, it was like it was definitely a big search. So this was not just like we went to galleries and just waved our arm and said, well, just take the whole wall. I mean, this was something that took 5 years. And what I liked about it was that search.
There's a specificity to the collection, isn't there? Isn't it related with architecture?
No, not at all. It was basically kind of art and language, drawing and language, drawing and media, the idea of collage, the idea of sculptural work. So these were the ideas that we were working from. And also, because that collection, generally, we were looking at the Tate collection and thinking what they didn't have. So it was an alternative collection to what the Tate had.
Well, that takes me to the idea of building a program around drawing, and you're establishing, some themes and some orientations. So how, Kate, because I asked the question very directly to Brett because of the moment he's going through right now in his career, but do you have a sense of changes since you started out in 2000? How you build up a program, because you've been there since the beginning, and what are your challenges right now in terms of the future and in terms of the program you're delineating?
I think one of the challenges is people being happy to interact with art over the internet rather than coming to the gallery, quite frankly. Especially with drawing, you really do have to come and see it. But I don't need to say that, you're all here to see drawing. So I'm preaching to the converted. But I think in particularly we are faced with a big challenge with the younger generation. And I think the way to kind of answer that is we try to work very much with art schools. So we have good partnerships with but there are various art schools in London that have masters and BA courses in drawing specifically. So we try to kind of work with them to see how we can encourage what it is that those art students are actually looking for in an institution like drawing room. So rather than just trying to operate as we've always operated, we're trying to be a little bit more responsive to, ways that we can actually encourage those people to get out of their bedrooms, off their computers, and into our space, and to interact with the work in different ways. And one of the ways we try to encourage them to do that is the opportunity to actually meet artists and to work with artists in artist-led workshops, and through talks. But we do find, actually, I think we probably do more group exhibitions and more trans-historical group exhibitions than we did at the start. And we try within those group exhibitions to have a whole spread of artists from historical work, which puts the contemporary work in some sort of context, but also it still continues to commission artists to make new work, because that's always been something really important to us, to actually enable and encourage and support artists in the production of new work. So, through introducing them to the idea of the exhibition, to the curator of the exhibition, and the dialogue that they have the opportunity to have with the other artists in the exhibition, this will generate new work. That's very, very important for us. But we do find that audiences like those kind of mixed shows that have a range of different artists. So I think we're doing more and more of that.
So I was thinking about going back to what you said, and about going, specifically showing a lot of Indian drawing and going to other parts of the world. And with the collection, you also have artifacts, and you have other kinds. You don't only have contemporary art. So did you change perspectives when you go to other places, or you were looking at other kinds of pieces of a collection? Does it change the program, or are you thinking about interacting with that side of the collection at the Manila?
Yes, and I think that will make this institute ever more exciting and interesting. That what happens when we take paintings that might be drawings as well into the drawing space. We actually have this space to do that experimentation with the collection. And I'll say, well, we're physically moving the collection of drawing across the street to the new building. It's still one collection, and we're collecting in a way that we also don't have to create boundaries between painting or sculpture or drawing, that there's a fluidity in the nature of the collection itself that we certainly want to push the envelope with our historical collection.
Imagine the last show you did, right, was Mona Hatoum. I always think of Mona Hatoum as someone who draws in space. Her sculptural work, it would be interesting if you played, I don't know if you purchased any work out of that show, but that should go in your drawing center.
Oh, we did, Brett, but I don't know. It's marbles on the floor.
Okay, so maybe not.
But she did. I just finished a Mona Hatoum show, the first in Europe. She's quite well known. In the United States, this was her first show in 20 years. And out of her time in Houston, I organized a residency for her. She produced 2 new bodies of drawing specifically that we showcased in the exhibition. And I think Mona Hatoum is one of those artists that doesn't confine herself to drawing by any means. And her politics of drawing are found not in the content of the drawing, but drawing as a strategy. And so, for example, a new series of drawing she's done is called Drawing Heat, where she's taking parchment paper, wax paper from the supermarket, and using a soldering tool to make the lines in the wax pigment. So the lines are just made by heat that's been applied to create a lighter line. And of course, then this sort of becomes a catalyst for talking about things like exile and dislocation and boundaries and walls. And I'm really excited by this new group. We've acquired some, and the work's traveling to other locations in the U.S. But I think she's perfect in representing these questions about drawing and the potential of drawing as a political strategy.
Well, I think it's a really good way to sum it up, what we've been talking about, drawing a strategy, in the sense that you've talked about the political aspects and the community aspects of drawing, and you've mentioned how you define your program also in going outside of the UK. So perhaps I'd like to finish, because I know you have like a marathon of talks afterwards, with a question that's, I don't know, maybe hard to answer, but what was your most surprising experience with showing drawing, or challenging or exciting, or something that really, really, really shook you or changed the way you looked at drawing, and drawing in space particularly?
At me. Anyone.
The three of you, of course. Who goes first?
Okay. I think the artists I've most, well, no, I don't know. I've enjoyed working with lots of artists, but Franz Erhard Wolter was an amazing artist to work with. He's now in his 80s.
Tell us the story.
And we came across, we knew of his work from the 50s and 60s. He was really pushing, then what drawing could be, and using gesture as drawing and as sculpture. And he was using paper as a sculptural element rather than just as a substrate. But then he was experimenting with line, and he was experimenting with many different things. We did a show which became a survey exhibition, which was the first survey exhibition of his work in the UK. But it culminated in this this drawn book that recorded his creative life, called Dust of Stars. And it's 284 pages of drawings showing his creative life and all of the different stages that it's been through, and meeting Eva Hesse, and meeting all the different people, Duchamp, and all kind of drawn absolutely beautifully. And then at the end of the exhibition, after he'd hung the exhibition at Drawing Room, he then proceeded to make a drawing of the installation, which involved him actually measuring between each thing that was hung on the wall and on the floor, and made another drawing of that. And this was why he has this incredible memory. So he's logged all of his past, all of the things that he's ever made is lodged in his mind. So when he came to make his Dust of Stars book about his creator's life, it was there. It just poured out. So I mean, he just used all these different modes of drawing throughout his life. And he was just fantastic to work with incredible energy and inspiring.
Kate, is it true? Because I think he's drawn a floor plan of every exhibition that he's ever been in.
Yeah, he has.
I've actually seen those. They're kind of unbelievable.
Yeah. Right from the very first exhibition he did as a student. So he's always done that.
He processes everything through drawing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a passage also from what he's doing in the present. It's incredible.
Yeah.
It was almost a springboard for a show that we were going to do about drawings of exhibition design. Exhibition drawings.
Yeah.
I mean, we were kind of thinking about that. And there were many curators that also, like Pierre Estinet, there were many curators that drew exhibitions. I mean, I'm a terrible drawer, but I often sketch out shows, so I was thinking about that as a kind of concept. So that his work was very interesting to me.
How about you?
I'll say, I think what really changed my understanding of drawing, and this was also after working with drawing for quite a while, was working with Richard Serra. And I had written the catalog essay. I had written about how he understands drawing as a way of being in the world, which is just a lovely way of thinking about drawing as a critical, daily, vital activity. But I had the chance of having to be with him for 3 weeks every day. And it's a lot of energy, but what's extraordinary was watching him, that throughout the day he always had a notebook. He always draws. He sees the world through drawing, and being with him for that period of time was incredibly illuminating, with sort of being with an artist and being with them on a daily basis of how they use drawing, not as an end, not as a way of making work for the wall,
so it
but
was a
simply
way for
as a way
him
of
to think,
processing.
to process. Yeah. So you're talking about his notebooks that he uses just to think, and he keeps for himself.
Right. Exactly.
So he draws in front of you all the time, thinking, or
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting to know. How are you, Brett?
I'm going to take a slightly different approach. I mean, I'm going to talk about two shows that actually, I don't want to say upset people, but maybe pushed my audience kind of far. One was with Richard Serra. We did a show called Demonstration Drawings, and Richard hired other artists in Thailand to essentially they were caricature artists or people that drew your portrait in a shopping mall. He collected them all up. Every day he would send them a picture from a newspaper, the International Herald Tribune, and if they wanted to, they could make a copy of that image for $150. And so he built an archive of about 800 of these drawings, and we showed about 400 at the Drawing Center. And I'll say that because of the fact that Rick Ritt didn't make the drawings, and because of the fact that the artist hand wasn't present in the making of the work, that there were many people who were incredibly upset that we would show these drawings in a way because they felt that it was exploitive or that Rick Ritt was signing his name. The name of each individual artist was listed, but not necessarily attributed to each drawing. My sense was actually that show was more about drawing technique than any other show that we've ever done, because there were 12 different hands, and as you looked at all of these different drawings, you could identify who drew which one. I mean, not by name, but you surely saw style. So the other show was with Gabriel de la Mora, where he's an artist from Mexico City, and when I went to visit him a couple of years ago, he told me that he was going around flea markets in Mexico City and collecting old speaker grills that had the stain of the air passing through, like the woofer and the tweeter. So basically, you had these drawings, and there's a picture of that coming up, I think, in the slideshow. So basically, I installed 55 pairs of speaker grills that just had the stain. Of course, Gabriel didn't make these stains; they were just simply made by time and sound and air. But it was a ready-made drawing. And again, this was something that my audience pushed back on a little bit, and I think it's still to me, after post-Duchamp, I don't think we need to have a discussion about ready-made art, but in drawing, when you take the hand away, that's heretical.
Yes,
I mean, that's the end of it. I mean, you'll be, you'll be put on a stake, and it's fine. I mean, to me, that's why at the Drawing Center we've been able to kind of ply that territory and go sometimes maybe beyond the boundary and look backwards. For Gabriel, the issue for me was I asked him point blank, I said, "Are these your drawings?" And he said, "This is my drawings. This is how I view drawing." So I take him at face value.
This comes to what we were talking about. Perhaps the specificity of drawing, there's still this notion of skill and of the hand. The examples you both mentioned were about someone drawing and having a very specific memory and a very specific skill in thinking through the lines. So we still have that attachment to the notion of skill and virtuoso drawing in a way. So your examples are particularly compelling because they have to do with those expectations regarding drawing. So it hasn't changed that much then, because we've been talking about these changes and the fact that you see drawings in bigger institutions, but in a way regarding audiences, have audiences changed that much after all? If these exhibitions were so
they're only going to change by if we're willing to make these kinds of choices and to show this kind of work. I mean, I think we have to lead by example, but again, the Drawing Center goes out and sometimes jumps off the cliff. Maybe that's not what everyone wants to do, but to me, that's been a strategy in which I think we can kind of create and continue to push. I mean, I think Kate, you've done that and a lot too, and so
I think, I would say that the majority of artists that we've worked with over the last 15 years are artists who are actually trying to get away from the connection between the touch of the artist, and they're trying to create that distance. So, I mean, I think it's coming back a little, and our next exhibition, which is a collaboration with Modern Art Oxford, is actually looking at very traditional drawing techniques. But in response to contemporary life and contemporary issues, and it's very image-led work. But I do think that even those artists are still doing their best to avoid actually exposing the inflection of the artist's hand. They're still wanting to create that kind of distance. So it's still a very kind of critical issue, I think, for the artists that we've worked with over the last 15 years.
Don't you think, just listening to both of you and thinking about our institution, I mean, that's a problem of a media-specific institution. We're like, we created that problem because we're creating a context that says, welcome to the Drawing Center, welcome to the Drawing Institute. So automatically, anyone going in will be like, well, I don't think that's drawing. Whereas your show in a gallery of MoMA would not even, those questions would not even come up. And that's also what's so wonderful about the possibility of these spaces.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I mean, it is sometimes incredibly frustrating, and you want to show work which isn't a drawing a lot. And that happens where you can't include things in your program that you really want to, which can be very frustrating sometimes.
Well, you just do them somewhere else.
Yes, exactly. But basically, I love the intellectual challenge of always having to work within parameters. And I always use it as well when I'm talking to students about limiting your parameters in terms of making things, you know, a way to kind of move forward with work when you're kind of stuck. And of course, drawing has historically been one of those things that's helped artists to kind of get unstuck, like Philip Guston famously. And you know, if you just, there's a kind of, it's a reduction in the simplicity as when we send out a sheet of paper and ask artists to make something on that A4 sheet of paper. And artists actually say that was actually, for me, suddenly to have that restriction was incredibly productive and creative. So I think drawing has that, and it can, within those quite confined parameters, can actually potentially unlock a new kind of seam of creativity.
It's the genderless, what I'm saying, the genreless.
Genderless too. Lines are genderless. Yeah.
Genderless medium, the genreless genre in a way, because it's funny that we've historically moved away from the idea of genre, and painters, of course, are not making painting. But at the same time, there's a certain comfort in dealing with drawing, because it's historically it's not really, you know, it's not really considered to be an established genre in a way.
Although it is 35,000 years old. I mean,
Yeah,
if you
it's
want to
the
go
old.
back to Chavot, I mean, it's, you know, you do have the first images. I mean, I just wanted to build on one thing because, you know, when I left PS1, which was a contemporary art center, probably one of the more freewheeling places in the world in terms of how it approaches contemporary art and contemporary making, you know, a lot of my colleagues said, you're going to go to the drawing center, it's going to be so boring and narrow, and it's just going to, you just have to deal with this medium. And actually, to be totally honest, at the last 11 years, I've had much more freedom than many of my other colleagues working in the contemporary art field, because basically my remit now is, I would say, 35,000 years of image making. I mean, you know, and I can approach this medium. I've taken maybe a slightly more deconstructive approach, and I've kind of tried to highlight things like incompleteness and the inchoate nature of drawing, and maybe the sense of absence as opposed to presence. I mean, with drawing you can play because of line. I mean, and I would say that if you want to define what drawing is, I mean, it's an approach to object making that has very specific things, but there are people like Pat Steer, who I would say primarily, I mean, she gave a talk at the Drawing Center that said everything I do is a drawing. I mean, every painting I think that she makes is a drawing. It's a form of drawing. So to me, it's actually been a very refreshing and very open-ended institution to work in, even though it's medium specific. It's actually been, from a personal standpoint, probably the most liberating experience that I've had as a kind of administrator and curator. So,
Do you want to? You wanted to add something?
Well, no, I mean, I would. Yeah, I mean, I think I said it. Yes, I agree.
Constraints are good. Rules.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much. This was really exciting to have the opportunity to have the three of you together and to go over your experience and the future as well with Michelle. So thank you very, very much. Would someone, do we have time for questions? Est-ce qu'on a du temps pour des questions? Oui. Does someone want to ask any questions? Are there any doubts, challenges?
One very specific question.
Oh, hi, Fiona.
I can shout. No worries. No
You
worries.
can? Okay.
I can shout. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm very interested in philosophy, for I think in art as well. So I was wondering, is any of you doing next year or in 2 years a show concerning ancient world?
The ancient world.
Yes. Then, if so, you can reach us.
Okay. Not on the plans at the moment, but you never know. Thank you.
No?
We are reinstalling our ancient collection that will go on view in September. So
There you go.
it's not tied to drawing, though.
could you define what the ancient world is?
Yes, I would say everything from the old Greek culture to to 300 after crest.
Oh, you mentioned philosophy. I know where you're coming from because you are Flatland Gallery and you're thinking of Stelios, aren't you? Yes, of course. Okay. A Greek artist that is inside, on the inside section. Yeah.
I mean,
so I think it's a reference to philosophy and to mythology that Fiona's referencing.
The Drawing Center doesn't have any particular plans right this moment to do historical shows, but we have done a lot of shows that have looked at, I would say, 14th, 15th, 16th century. I think you're talking a little before that. But I would say that our approach is open. So if there was something that we should be looking at, tell us. We're always happy to explore.
There's a question about you need the mic.
Perhaps it goes enough. Thank you. Thanks. I work with students in Germany. Our big question is, what do you think about the new digital techniques for drawing, even virtual drawing? We have a new technique to draw in a virtual room, in a virtual space. What do you think, or is it important for your work to show even digital techniques, drawing techniques?
I guess we're talking about technology and new technologies in regards to the practice of drawing.
I've been thinking about this for 10 years. The Drawing Center has not done a digital drawing show. It's something that really, how would I put this? It makes my curators very upset when I bring it up every time because I think that part of the issue right now with digital drawing is that there is no language to determine whether or not digital drawing, if it's successful or not. It can appear on a screen when you output it. Where does it happen? Most of the time it seems algorithmically based. To me, I don't care if you draw on a tablet and, that's fine. I mean, I once gave a talk with Michael Graves, the architect, and we got into a ridiculous argument. He said, you can't be an architect unless you go to Rome and you can draw the porticos of Rome by hand. And I was like, Michael, listen, I'm the director of the Drawing Center. I mean, I don't want to be ironic, but I have plenty of friends that went to Cooper Union. They don't even know how to draw at all, and they're drawing on computers, and they're making buildings, and they're making perfectly fine buildings. You may not like them, but they're architects. So, I mean, I was defending digital drawing in a sense of it's just another tool. I've been talking a lot with Shahzad Dawood, who's doing a lot of stuff with VR in London, and if I was going to stay at the Drawing Center, I would have definitely had worked with Shahzad on developing a VR project around drawing and thinking about that. And that was something that I was very, very, very interested in doing because I think that is one of the areas that my institution has had a little bit of a blind spot, and we haven't been able to push it forward because I don't think that we don't know yet enough about how to position it in a way and how to write about it and how to think through it. So.
Well, Britain's most famous artist, David Hockney, loves it, and people absolutely. His exhibition, his most recent exhibition, that room with his digital drawings, was full of people absolutely, totally absorbed. So I would say it's sort of pretty much out there. We did a sort of full day's kind of conference at Drawing Room to look at what is the digital draw. It's actually on our website. So all of our talks we try to be a resource for contemporary drawing, and our website, we record everything, all the talks that we do. So there is something on there that happened. And we were intending to do some digital commissions. We have looked at the history of digital drawing as well, with people like Frederick Hammersley and Darrell Viner working in the 70s. So it's something we would definitely are interested in the program, and there are artists that we've worked with, like Claude Heath, who is working with digital drawing. So it's something which is very much kind of, it's just a question of finding, for us it's always a question.
And you've also worked with Susan Morris, who's using technology in a completely different way with eye tracking technologies, and she draws with motion capture. So when we talk about technology, there's also the definition, digital technologies and technology in general. There's also the definition of what technology is. We mentioned the idea of automatism and automation, and what a machine is, and how you can draw like a machine, and how your body is a machine as well. And there's always that confusion, and I think it's also a problem of definition, really, because sometimes when we talk about digital and new technologies, it tends to be very geeky and very kind of device oriented, and that's, I think, as a spectator, not really, speaking in terms of curating, but it can be a problem.
Someone explained to me that, and I would say that this kind of unlocked for me a way of thinking about digital work. I mean, drawing is a very binary activity. It's a 0-1 activity in a way. I mean, if you want to think about it in those terms. And I have to say that kind of opened up a whole series of thoughts about how to position digital work. One person that I studied with was Harold Cohn. I don't know if you're familiar with Harold's work. I mean, another UK-based artist. And Harold had what he called a little turtle, a little Aaron machine, a drawing machine. And for 5 years at UC San Diego was learning how to make Lascaux cave drawings. And so he would just let the machine run. It was like a little vacuum, like one of those little vacuum cleaners that you see now that goes in your floor. And it would just it was kind of learning how to make ancient drawings. And that program ran out, I think, over about a 5 to 8 year period. And I talked to Harold a lot in 1986 through 1991. And that work has really stuck with me. But I don't know why the UK seems to be, I mean, I would say I've done more talks about digital drawing. Northampton, I've been involved in a lot of symposium about digital drawing. It seems like the UK is a place where there's a lot of activity around that right now.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of interest. And we're going to be doing a really interesting event, actually, which is it's curated by the artist David Musgrave, and it's where he's involving us. He's invited various artists to perform or do a different kind of event. But one of the people invited is actually a computer programmer who's and there's a computer program now which can generate drawings all by itself. He's going to come and talk about his it's the same computer programming company that's designed the I can't think of the right term for chess, that competes.
I thought you were saying he invited a computer program,
No,
and then I thought,
programmer.
oh no, but then
Programmer.
yes, in a way he did.
Yes.
Watson, the programs.
Yeah, it's not. It's this is called Deep Mind. This particular one, yeah. But anyway, so yeah, it's something we're very interested in exploring, and there will be an exhibition coming soon at Drawing Room, but not in the immediate.
Are there any other questions? I think we need to give you guys a rest, but anyway, thank you very, very much, and thank you guys as well for coming. Yeah.